Hello, and welcome to Desert Island Discord. Let battle commence. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Desert Island Discord, the podcast where Mark calls out some of the more frustrating aspects of investing, and he reveals the things that annoy him the most as a private investor. Today we're talking about boycotts. Now, we're not criticising people who prefer not to buy certain products because of their personal views, but this is more about how relying on out-of-date information and having an inconsistent approach to boycotting is damaging investment in products that are valuable to society. We're calling it cherry picking. So, to get started, Mark, to help our activist listeners who may have a fresh placard that needs something writing on it, just how much of an unethical investor are you?
Many businesses have an aspect of their operation that some would find problematic. For example, from my own portfolio, Entain is a gambling company. Central Asia Metals is a mining business which extracts metals and mineral resources. Concurrent Technologies and MTI Wireless Edge do not actually produce arms, but they make computers and antennas that are used in defence. And Greggs and Magnum Ice Cream could face accusations of fueling obesity. And I've recently invested in an alcohol drinks business, so watch out for that one.
Right, okay. Well, the motivation for boycotts seems to fall into two categories, and we're going to kind of cover them. Firstly, there's the easy, no sacrifice boycott. And this is where people boycott one company because they know they can get the same product elsewhere. So your boycott doesn't actually mean you have to go without.
Yes, most definitely. For example, people have boycotted fast fashion for a long time, and the manufacturer Shine in particular. There have been reports that 75-hour working weeks and child labour are keeping the brand afloat, but it's a privately run business and harder to intimidate. PLCs are still their preferred target. Plus, with fashion, there are always other options for your clothing.
Yes, I would imagine that boycotting one business is considered adequate for many people. Once they've made their point, I'm sure that they apply less diligence to scrutinising their alternative supplier. And the point you're making there, it leads us to the next thing, which is the low-hanging fruit boycott. So what exactly is meant by that?
Well, for example, take the Rubaya mine collapse in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was recently on the 28th of January 2026, and over 400 people have died, including children who were working in the mine, and this was due to a landslide. The mine was poorly maintained and had poor practices, and this is truly a disaster. Now, this is early days, but it will be interesting what level of protest and action this attracts in comparison to elsewhere and against PLCs.
So what is mined at Rubaya?
It's a metallic ore called coltan, the products of which are used in smartphones, laptops, cameras and EVs, wind turbines and solar panels, the things that we like to have in the West. However, coltan is called a conflict mineral because profits from its sale are used to buy weapons and fund militias. And people are working in the mines for a few dollars a day, and it sounds to me as though it's akin to slavery.
So who's responsible for operating the Rubaya mines?
The mines have been controlled since May 2024 by M23 rebels. It's not a motorway. M23 is short for the March 23rd Movement, who are a Congolese or Rwandan-backed paramilitia group. Now, this precious coltan is not being used by domestic Congolese EVs, laptops or smartphone industry. It's finding its way into the products of world-famous brands. And how? Well, with the power of the internet, apparently it's smuggled across the border to Rwanda. It's cut with Rwandan coltan and then exported to the likes of China and the UAE where it's refined.
Right. Terrible human rights abuse situation. So who do you boycott?
There's no easy, clear-cut bogeyman to go for. There were reports last year that a Luxembourg commodity trader, Traxys, had bought 280 tons of DRC coltan from Rwanda. As a protester, who you target is more nebulous, and there's no easy go-to.
Well, the net zero zealots tend to target UK PLCs like Shell and BP, and the banks that finance them like Barclays. But to my knowledge, none of these companies employ child labour or use their profits to buy arms.
No, but they are a soft target, i.e., the low-hanging fruit, and they are easily recognised as large and coherent entities and an easy go-to for the climate change net zero lobby. And attacking these corporations is nothing new. I was reading about an anti-apartheid movement about the anti-apartheid movement in the 1980s, and Shell and Barclays, those names again, were targeted. Let us say here and now, neither of us are any supporters of apartheid or two-tier, either then or now. Unfortunately, most businesses need finance, and all need banking facilities. So banks will be an ever-present when somebody takes an issue with the cause. And I found an article with the actress Julie Christie outside Barclays Bank AGM in 1981 campaigning on apartheid. And on the topic of apartheid, UK supermarkets Tesco and Sainsbury's were boycotted for selling South African produce. And I concede that political pressure brought South Africa to abandon apartheid, but damaging its economy also damaged its people, the majority of which were what were called back then black South Africans, and I think what we call today people of colour South Africans. Perhaps it was a price that had to be paid for the greater good. It's what we call a moral paradox. Presumably, other UK supermarkets sold the same products, but these were the biggest and the highest profile supermarkets, and size has its benefits, but also some drawbacks. When there was the campaign against free carrier bags in stores, it always seemed to picture a Tesco carrier bag stuck up in a tree. And we move a little bit more up to date, and we replace Julie Christie with Emma Thompson. I think it's Dame Emma Thompson, who in 2015 campaigned outside Shell's HQ about drilling in the Arctic and highlighted the selfishness and greed. Unfortunately, we cannot all work in Hollywood. On greed, I wonder what her hourly rate is per movie. I did find in 2024 in the Daily Express, it put her net worth at £40 million. So, greed. What I would say about things like Shell, there's no Mr. Shell. It's got about 100,000 employees, and it's got many, many hundreds of people who are relying on it through funds for things like their pension to keep the heating on. So this is the same Emma Thompson who in 2019 flew 5,400 miles from Los Angeles to London to participate in an Extinction Rebellion protest. Just hold that thought a minute. In conclusion, it's the usual suspects who are generally targeted. They're big because they are successful and they do things that we need. But big is often portrayed to have got there through evil means. As a private investor, you can steer clear of anything you feel uncomfortable with. With these big corporates, oil and banks, etc., people protest, but they survive because deep down, we really need them to do what they do. And can you imagine a world where hydrocarbons never existed? We wouldn't have the luxury of a day out in London campaigning with our friends. We would be living a very primitive existence. And if these industries are too politically charged and you're worried about external forces, I would say investing is a bit like going on holiday to a dangerous country. Why bother when there's so many safer alternatives?
So that covers some of the motives for boycotting stuff. But the topic of this episode is really the bad habit of cherry-picking boycotts. Now, this is a practice that's very frustrating for companies because they are often singled out for punishment when other businesses do things that are equally deserving of criticism, but they are let off lightly. So we've identified the two most apparent reasons for not boycotting stuff. And the first is the greater good excuse not to boycott.
Yes, for example, deforestation and displacement of orangutan communities in Indonesia is broadly put at the door of palm oil producers. However, there are many other causes of deforestation in Indonesia, including the paper industry, of which I know quite a bit, cocoa, coffee, rubber, Some palm oil plantations were previously rubber plantations, and white pepper.
So are people in the West boycotting pepper and coffee because they caused deforestation?
Not that I'm aware of. A significant amount of deforestation has also taken place due to the mining industry. And the products mined in Indonesia include nickel, which is over 40% of world supply, copper and cobalt. And Indonesia is the world's second largest supplier of cobalt after Democratic Republic of Congo.
And have people boycotted EVs or other electrical products because orangutan communities were displaced by cobalt mines?
Again, it would appear not. Now, I will play devil's advocate here, but I strongly believe that the reason there have been no boycotts is because these metals are used extensively in the electricity industry, and electric everything is seen as the universal panacea for the issue of global warming. It really does appear to me that people are prepared to ignore environmental and human rights issues if they believe that the end justifies the means. There's no doubt that mining minerals for EV battery production has caused deaths. It's causing human rights issues. It has undoubtedly displaced orangutans and destroyed wildlife habitats. However, EVs will never be boycotted because making them is for the greater good.
The greater good. Now, you actually met up with the CEO of the RSPO quite recently. And what was his take on the problem of palm oil being the only product from Indonesia that seems to be deserving of a boycott?
Several months ago, I met up with Joseph de Cruz, a CEO of the RSPO, at the Shangri-La Hotel in Kuala Lumpur, where they were having their annual assembly. And we had a wide conversation. On palm oil, the anti-palm oil activists get their message across very concisely to the consumer in this short attention span TikTok world. The counter-argument, with all its facts and stress testing the accusations, takes more time than your customer wants to invest in their busy lives. The anti-palm oil argument sadly provides a handy shorthand. Also, Joseph added that they are up against what they're up against is, despite showing evidence and facts, for many people their belief system is too ingrained for it to now change, because to do so would turn their credo 180 degrees.
Okay, well, the next reason we've identified not to boycott something is the shiny product excuse. Now, this is the situation where a consumer's decision whether or not to boycott a product is very much determined by how much they really want that product. Now, I did some research into this, and I think I've come up with a good example of that problem. Back in 2010, 14 depressed workers committed suicide at Apple's Foxconn factory in China, where they were making iPhones. Now, the story was widely covered by mainstream media, so nobody thinking of buying an iPhone at that time had the excuse that they didn't know about it. Now, Apple reacted very quickly, and they claimed to have solved the problem. But subsequent investigations by some undercover reporters, including a BBC documentary in 2014 called Apple's Broken Promises, revealed that workers' rights abuses that bordered on slave labour were still happening in Apple's factories. Now, eventually, Apple resolved the suicide issue within their organisation, which is something obviously they have the power to do. But Apple hasn't addressed the issue of working conditions in other Chinese factories that are causing people who work there to become depressed and to kill themselves.
That stands to reason, because that's something that Apple has no control over.
Precisely. But the critical point this illustrates is that although Apple can lead by example and put their own house in order, the wider problem of worker suicides in China is not really something that Apple can do anything about. It's an issue that needs to be addressed by the Chinese government.
So did anyone boycott Apple products when this news came out?
Well, to be honest, Mark, I don't know. Apple's human rights issue was headline news for around 5 years, but I couldn't find anything online that said it caused a slump in iPhone sales. But people are certainly happy to buy iPhones now. I assume that consumers have decided that Apple has redeemed itself and that the ongoing problems regarding stressed out employees in China are just not unique to Apple.
That sounds like a reasonable argument. If manufacturers do everything in their power to mitigate the impacts of their own business, then it's up to governments to support them and take responsibility for dealing with impacts that are beyond the scope of individual companies to deal with.
It is indeed a reasonable argument, but unfortunately, activists don't apply that reasoning uniformly. I mean, you compare Apple's situation to a company like MP Evans, which is a major producer of palm oil. I mean, the focus of anti-palm oil protesters is that it has caused deforestation and that orangutan communities have been displaced by the historical development of plantations. However, just like Apple, MP Evans has led by example. The company's responded to concerns about the palm oil industry, and for decades it's operated plantations that no longer cut down forests or displace wildlife. In fact, none of the RSPO members do those things, and they haven't done so for years. The health and safety conditions for workers are good, wages are comparatively good. The company has built modern accommodation and schools for their employees, and they're engaged in a number of biodiversity products. But more importantly, iPhones are a good product, but palm oil is a really versatile product too, and it brings countless benefits in virtually every one of its applications.
So if consumers can forgive Apple and accept the reality that the wider issue of employee suicides is something that Apple can't control, it seems strange that they can't forgive palm oil producers like MP Evans, who have made equal, if not greater, progress in addressing consumer concerns, particularly in respect to wildlife management and sustainability. But they remain unforgiven for a wider issue that also can't control.
Well, there's your shiny product excuse not to boycott something in action.
So with thousands of products and companies to choose from, how on earth do activists decide which ones they should attack?
Well, if you're a business or an investor and you want to find out which products consumers are most likely to boycott, you can always pop along to ethicalconsumer.org. Now, this website actually has ethical shopping guides covering the categories of banking and investing, energy, food and drink, fashion and clothing, health and beauty, home and garden, technology and travel. Well, the site's very comprehensive, but I do think some of their reasoning is in need of a review. For example, under the category of money, unethical banks are, among other things, to quote, behind palm oil companies causing massive deforestation in Indonesia. Now, this is strange because under the category of technology, they don't say that banks are unethical if they are behind Apple, where workers are committing suicide due to the massive stress of making iPhones. But of course, that's probably because workers are no longer committing suicide in Apple factories. It's just a pity they can't bring themselves up to date about the fact that palm oil companies are no longer causing massive deforestation in Indonesia.
So they're basing their arguments on old news?
Well, they certainly are in that particular case. I mean, to be fair, it was good to see that in the transport category, they do acknowledge the issue of child labour and slave labour in the section about buying an EV, but they only highlight two what to avoid criteria. Each one has a bright red cross against it. The first criteria is the company connected to far-right political campaigning? And they use Tesla and Elon Musk as an example. And the second one is, does the company support the Israeli military to carry out Palestinian genocide? So there you go. As car reviews go, Jeremy Clarkson, eat your heart out.
It would be interesting if, in the interest of balance, they identify supporting the far left as a reason not to buy an EV, as well as the far right.
Yes, it would. But their definition of political extremism does seem very one-sided. There's also a league table under each category where specific companies are given an ethical rating, but you have to subscribe to see it. And I'm not prepared to pay £34 a year for someone who probably drives a Tesla and has an iPhone to tell me what not to buy because it's unethical.
So if the internet is providing questionable reasons as to why you should boycott things, how does an investor evaluate ethical standing of a company when they're thinking about buying a stock?
Well, the advice, which is something you always say, is that investors should do their own research. But unless you have inside information about a business, it's not always easy to determine the authenticity of the ethical claims that they might make in an annual report. For example, One of the tasks I had at my previous employers was to complete the ethical trading forms that customers would often send us. They centered on a general code of conduct which confirmed our commitment to human rights and fair labor practices, etc. We were required to supply those declarations with supporting evidence, such as certificates, for every company in our entire supply chain. Our bigger customers even demanded that we identify the factories where our products were being made, which was not a popular demand because some customers were big enough to approach those factories directly. The point being that transparency does carry a degree of commercial risk, and mitigating that risk can take priority over being entirely transparent about things in your annual report.
I read a lot of annual reports, and the incredible detail that some companies put into describing their environmental and DEI policies often outweighs the financial details about the company's performance. It does make me wonder if the massive volume of charts and infographics about carbon emissions and diversity are included deliberately in the hopes that anyone scrutinising the business will skip over reading them and conclude that everything is rosy.
Now, we could talk about this until the cows come home, but ultimately, how do you incorporate these considerations with running your own portfolio? You sold 2 stocks this year, and the companies behind them have both faced boycotts and protests in the past. Is this an example of how the court of public opinion can affect the decisions of shareholders?
No, they were simply my last of what I would call legacy holdings of when I was working in the precarious world of sales and had the comfort from an income stream of several dividend yielders. One of the stocks I recently removed was Barclays, in which I was an investor for around 20 years. And Barclays has come under increasing pressure from activists due to its association with companies, industries, and countries that meet with disapproval in one way or another. And again, it's a ready-made target. They've got high street branches still, and these are convenient for throwing paint at. And it's a defined point to hold protests. And in 2024, Palestine Action attacked branches. According to the BBC, it said that protests were carried out to demand the bank divests from Israeli weapons trade and fossil fuels. So Palestine Action also extending their remit into fossil fuels. And Greta has shown solidarity by expanding into the opposite territory. So I suppose it keeps her in the headlines.
Now, you see, your average ethical consumer will probably have an account with the Co-op Bank because they claim to be an ethical bank.
Very likely, but many banks do not clearly disclose their investment practices or the criteria used to define ethical investments. This can lead to confusion and mistrust among consumers. And for example, Deutsche Bank was investigated for exaggerating the sustainability of its investment products, which were marketed as environmentally friendly without any proper criteria. And through your career, Pat, I know that you've done extensive investigations into what they call greenwashing.
I have indeed. The other stock you disposed of was Rio Tinto, the mining business. Now, in 2020, in order to expand its mining operation, Rio Tinto destroyed some 46,000-year-old caves at, is it Yukon Gorge or Yukon Gorge? And for which they received international condemnation. So was that incident something that affected your opinion of the company?
Well, that was 5 years ago. I had held Rio for 12 years. The sales are what I thought were, or the sales are what I thought an agreeable exit. And for the record, at the time of the caves incident, I was a shareholder. Now, this was indeed a desecration, and the heritage of the Aborigine people was literally blown up in the quest for iron ore. And lawyers argued that what the company had done was legal. However, the whole thing ultimately unraveled and led to several board resignations. Now, I think it was quite right that the book was thrown at Rio on the grounds that although they legally could do it, perhaps they shouldn't have done it. But why did that event receive international condemnation and such a lot of media coverage? And nobody was killed in that incident, yet there was a public outcry. And the recent Rubaya mine deaths, coming back to that, hardly made the headlines. And there is a danger that environmentalists start valuing caves and wildlife more than people.
Now, I did some digging into mining, And that's not the only environmental issue that Rio Tinto has faced in the past. But I think this one, I'm going to read out, is unlikely to trigger a product boycott. And it's to do with Nestle, who make over 14 billion Nespresso single-use disposable coffee pods every year. Now, these pods are made from aluminium, and they are technically recyclable, but apparently less than 20% of them are actually recycled, at least according to the article I researched. And thousands of tons of waste pods goes into landfill every year. The aluminium for the pods is or was supplied by Rio Tinto, a company with less than an exemplary record of concern about protecting the environment or labour conditions and human rights. So faced with criticism about Rio Tinto, Nestle claimed that they plan to source 100% sustainable aluminium by 2020. So, and obviously this information I've got is around about 2018. And coffee lovers were keen to believe this, and Nespresso sales soared. But sadly, Nestle failed to meet their sustainability goal, and more unfortunately, they failed to tell anyone about their failure. And instead, they continue to claim that 93% of their coffee met their AAA sustainability quality program. Now, that claim has been met with accusations of greenwashing because those AAA quality standards are set by Nestle. They're not actually available for public scrutiny. So, if you're waiting for consumers to boycott Nespresso coffee machines, don't hold your breath. It will never happen because shiny new coffee machines, unsurprisingly, fall into the same boycott exemption category as shiny new iPhones and shiny new EVs.
You are so cynical, Paul. I'm a man of simple tastes. A jar of instant does me. Hopefully that plastic lid and the glass jar that I segregate and put into separate bins actually finds its way to a recycling plant. Anyway, I think that's just about wraps it up, Paul. Any final thoughts?
Well, from an investor's viewpoint, there are no impact-free products. The best you can do is avoid the ones that make money but do more harm than good. If the product you plan to invest in does more good than harm, then that's the only metric that you can use to base your investing decision on. When it comes to being selective about what you buy, I think it's good that people want to be ethical consumers, but you're not really being true to your ideals if you're cherry-picking things to boycott. I mean, considering Apple's human rights history and the child labour issues associated with EV battery production, it would be a little hypocritical for EV owners to use their iPhone to tell a friend not to buy peanut butter if it has palm oil in it.
Yes, I also think that if you've held a strong negative opinion about something for years, it's a good idea to periodically update your knowledge about the issue and consider whether or not your opinion is still justifiable today. Taking that approach will certainly prevent good products and services from failing to gain investment due to historical issues that have since been resolved. Anyway, is this the time where we have our gripe, Paul? Our non-investing gripe?
Yes, it is. I think that time has arrived. So, what's your non-investing gripe for today, Mark?
Well, I would say people who dawdle at the front of a queue, right? And I've given several examples of this. I don't know if you can relate to this, Paul. Firstly, there's those that just want to chat. When there's people queuing behind them, have a chat with the person at the checkout. And I know there's some people that are lonely, but with 8 billion people on the planet, I think just get some friends or chat to somebody else in the supermarket. So that's one. And then there's what I'm sorry to say, I might be being a bit sexist here, but it's generally women, this one, or when they're told the bill, they haven't even got the purse from the bottom of the bag. And then they spend a lot of time rummaging, trying to find the purse, right? And apologizing to the person on the checkout. And they're not bothered. They're on the clock. They're getting paid. And it's the rest of us, again, snaking behind in the queue that are getting frustrated. And then I'll just give another one, right, whereby this happened to me quite recently. There was a gentleman who was the culprit in this one. I was in this sandwich shop. I was queuing for about 10 minutes, a really good sandwich shop. And I've already rehearsed what I want. You know, I've got my money in my hand and we're all moving forward in the queue. And he got to the counter and said, "How can I help you?" And he said, "Yeah, all right. Oh, what do I want?" And it was at that stage, it took all my powers of restraint not to shout at this guy to say, you've been studying for 10 minutes and you can't decide what you wanted. So I'm going to go with that, people. People who dawdle at the front of a queue. What about yourself?
Well, I mean, I have the same problem with the checkout, especially if they have coupons. I don't know. They always seem to manage to have coupons, and the coupons are always in the purse, which is in the bottom of the bag, and the coupons are nearly always out of date. Then there's always a big fuss. But on a food retail basis, I say it's just packaging that you can't open. Particularly, that packet of bacon that says "tear here." And it just doesn't happen. I can't remember the last time I had a packet of bacon that said "tear here" on the corner, and I was actually able to tear it open. I nearly always wind up, running for a knife or a pair of scissors. And biscuits, same thing. Little tiny bit of plastic at the top of the package that says "tear here," and there's supposed to be a red strip of plastic that you pull, and that tears the paper. But you can never find that. And bread. When you get a loaf of bread and it has that plastic strip around the top, and they're supposed one length is supposed to be shorter than the other, so you can actually peel them apart, but they're nearly always just like welded together. So, yeah, packaging that you can't open easily.
Have you found in your advancing years that your arthritis is helping you to diet through because you can't get at the food, Paul? Is that actually a benefit?
Yeah, I just attack everything with a pair of scissors and a knife now. I don't even bother if it says. The only thing I can do properly is pierce film lid. I can still manage that.
Oh, for your speciality chicken ping?
That's the one, yeah.
When it pings in the microwave, yeah?
Yeah. Anyway, right. Well, thanks very much indeed for obviously the discussions about the boycotting and for your off-topic rant. And obviously a reminder to listeners, this is just a kind of supplementary podcast that we're doing from time to time, in addition to Mark's stock reviews. So, do subscribe if you want to be notified when the next episode is released. And until then, thanks very much for listening. See you next time.